All right, guys, welcome back to the Buck Fever podcast. I'm Noah,
I'm Jake.
and today's episode is going to be all about tree stands. Now, before we get into it, I want to remind you guys that this podcast is available not only on YouTube, but also pretty much anywhere else that you can get a podcast. Spotify and Apple Podcasts being the big ones, but it's pretty much available everywhere. So wherever you get your podcast, go look for it. The Buck Fever podcast, it should be up there. If you want to watch it specifically, you'll have to watch it on our YouTube channel, which is Buck Fever Outdoors. So let's get into it. First things first, you got to know when to put your tree stands up. So, that typically, it obviously has to happen before the season, but how early is too early? When's the right time?
I'd say we're usually between May and June.
Okay.
July at the latest. If we can't find a weekend to go do it, usually
Right.
May or June. That gives you enough time to get up there and see if you like it or not, or make changes and trim everything. Basically, that's kind of the main thing. I've actually found that putting them up that early and then trimming them doesn't really, you almost got to go back there in August, not too late August, but mid-August, to make sure that nothing else is grown, because over the summer that'll happen. I know a couple times when we put them up there in May or early June, I'll get up there opening weekend or the first time sitting in that stand. I'm like, wow, I cannot shoot half the spots I thought I would be able to shoot. So
Yeah, that stuff can grow pretty fast on you. So definitely if it's up there a little bit earlier, that's something you got to make sure that you can still shoot in all the spots that you want to be able to shoot. In certain stands, depending upon where you put them, that might not be as big of a factor. But I think there's something to be said for having them up early enough that deer can kind of get used to them being there, especially if you have to put a lot of stands up in a certain area. You want to make sure that they're kind of used to that all of a sudden that doesn't just show up a week before the season and now they're freaked out, what is this thing doing here, whether you're in it or not. So I think getting it up early enough that they can kind of get used to it, but you also don't want it to be exposed to the weather for too long for no reason, because they obviously can take wear and tear. They can be expensive, so you don't want to just be buying new tree stands every year, especially if you have a lot of tree stands out there. Squirrels can tear them up. We had one this year that a squirrel just absolutely destroyed. He just ate the whole thing.
I'd say that's our biggest problem.
Is the squirrels?
Squirrels eating the seats, or trying to eat the seats.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a mesh fabric, because ours are the ladder stands, so they have the flip down seats, or that guardrail that comes down. There's that little styrofoam covered thing.
Mm-hmm.
They love that for some reason.
Do you have as big a problem with the mesh seats?
It's only a couple stands. I think it's more where there's prominent squirrel activity, which sounds stupid, but you can tell where there's a lot more squirrels than not. And when our stands are in those areas, they'll just chew on anything on there, almost even just the plastic parts of the stand. They'll try and chew on that.
Yeah, it's definitely true that certain stands are worse than others. There's certain ones where even when you're sitting there, you just never see a squirrel, and then other ones there's a ton. But we've had better luck with the mesh than with the foam. Anything foam, they just go crazy. So
we don't even when we had hang-ons, we wouldn't leave a seat cushion in each one. You just take one in your backpack everywhere you go, because if you leave it, they'll just destroy it.
Yeah, because it got to the point this year where Ben was sitting in one of them and they had just completely destroyed it. And so then there's all this foam that's just laying on the ground that's kind of obvious, and it's just not a good situation at all. So you definitely don't want to leave them out there too long for any of that. I think that May to June area is probably about right. You got to leave yourself enough time in case things go wrong, because there's always something that comes up that you didn't expect. You're missing parts or pieces, or something breaks. So you got to give yourself enough time. You don't want to feel like you're too crammed where now you're just going to be rushing to get them in before the season.
You also probably want to, depends how early you get your cameras out. I don't know, that's kind of another thing. We usually don't put ours out till July, but if you put them out in June and you're getting a pretty good pattern on deer where you usually don't have a stand, it's kind of a good way to know when to put yours out, so you can see what deer are doing and where they're going.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we tend to keep our cameras out pretty early, just kind of for that reason, to get a pattern on them, and we just like to see the pictures, so we like having them out pretty much as early as possible. I know you guys usually wait a lot longer on that, but I guess there's something to be said for that too. If you have your cameras out early enough, that might sort of dictate when you want to put up certain stands and where. Maybe you kind of hold on to them, and as you start to see activity in certain areas, you kind of pinpoint, okay, I've got these 6 stands, and I need to figure out where I want to put them. Maybe some of them are going to be the same every year, but maybe some of them you want to look at, okay, where are the deer moving this year? Move some of your cameras around, kind of figure out maybe where the best spot is for some of those other stands too. So that's not the worst idea. And then obviously along those lines, you're going to have different stands that are going to be used in different ways, right? So between morning and night, there's even a difference, and then at different times throughout the season. So I mean, there's obviously a lot of different setups that you might want to be trying to get. So early season, what kind of things would you be looking for in a stand setup?
Well, for us, early season, we're probably not gonna get to the middle of the woods. We're gonna hunt like edges or pretty much just a couple, like maybe 100 yards into the woods, just somewhere where you're not gonna bust them going in, blowing through their bedding, because we have probably, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 of those stands where, like, if you're gonna go in there, you're gonna sit all day type thing, or you go in mid morning, and because you know you're probably gonna bump deer, but if you get in there at the right time, you're gonna see a lot of deer at the same time. So early season, we're gonna, and I guess it also depends on the crops that are planted. If there's corn, kind of hard to hunt the field because you're not gonna see anything.
Right.
But for beans, I love sitting on field edges, and just early season, we don't like to disturb there. We're gonna sit on water holes a lot, which are pretty much right along our field edges too, because the deer are lazy and they love that water, and they almost hit it pretty much like clockwork.
Yeah. Early season, you can definitely pattern them in those situations too. I agree. Early season, you kind of have to be looking more like it's a marathon, not a sprint. Be kind of conservative with where you're going to go sit. Yeah, you definitely don't want to be bumping out deer where you don't really need to, because you have that time.
Unless you have one pattern and have a perfect wind, kind of like a couple years ago when I had that one. But we don't do that like every year. We're not going to just send someone into the middle of the woods where we know there's deer just because we want to go see deer or something like that.
But Blade Runner is a good example
Yes.
for what happened, with early season, and he was on opening day.
Yeah, we got a rare east wind, and he was in there quite often, and a deer that caliber and maturity is going to usually not, I mean, they're going to be smart, so it's kind of like if we didn't get him that first day and he came in there and I screwed it up or something, there's a good chance who knows if we would have seen him again or even had another shot at him. So
yeah, it was a boom or bust situation there, and I just remember that day everything going wrong. You were sweating, and you said the leaves were super loud, and just didn't think it was going to work, but it ended up paying off. He was just bedding like, I don't know, probably 50, 60 yards to the south.
From the food plot, yeah.
Yeah, because we kind of had him patterned then during shed season. We found his sheds in that area, and we had known based on trail camera pictures and other things, kind of knew like that's where they were bedding, and that's where he was coming out of.
Yeah, I mean, he was in there like even when he was a 3-year-old, he was in there on that side of the property like all the time, and he rarely was on the other side, but I think he just felt comfortable over there. And then when we were getting pictures of him pretty consistently, I knew that going in there was risky, but it was opening day, so we had tons of leaves and cover, and for all I know, he probably just thought I was another deer walking into the stand because I was going slow and kind of walking like a deer. Basically, I was making a ton of noise because I couldn't find the path, but I think he just probably figured, oh, it's just another deer or something like that. And I had tons of cover, like you can't see unless they're in the food plot basically.
Yeah. So I think anytime you have a deer pattern like that, it's not the worst idea to just go in there after him because, like you said, you don't know how long that pattern's going to keep up. You don't know if he gets spooked, something happens, and next thing you know, you don't have a chance anymore. You don't want to wait too long on that. You want to make sure you go after him while you have the chance. So I think at any point throughout the season, if you have a deer pattern, it's not the worst idea to go in there after them. But if you're more like, well, we got a bunch of deer, they're all kind of still herded up. They're not really any specific deer that are specifically patterned in some way. Sitting over a bean field early season can be great because you can kind of start to put some of those connections together and sort of make some of those patterns. Like, oh, every time I sit here, I watch that deer come out of that spot. He's coming out of the same spot in the woods. Maybe you don't even have a stand there, but it'll kind of help you put together some of the pieces of the puzzle of where he might be bedding, where he's coming from and going to, and what time. So early season can be a great time to do a lot of scouting, where you can just get eyes on deer, figure out what they're up to, kind of get a good consensus of your herd, figure out what's going on. I don't mind that as an early season tactic.
I honestly love early season like bean field or egg field sits where you can see for 500-600 yards and just watch deer filter out, and the chance you're going to shoot one is slim to none, but I mean, you're probably not going to get eaten alive by bugs if you're kind of in a fence line or something of that matter, and you just see a lot of deer, and I like that a lot.
Right. I mean, that's ultimately, it's just a fun sit to be able to do that early season. Get out there where you can see a ton of deer, and that's something you can do in the summer a little bit also if you have the time for that. I think some people maybe would be worried about putting pressure on that you don't need to put on in the summer, but that also comes down to how you hunt it and how you sit it.
Well, we did a couple of those sits, summer sits like 2 years ago, but we sat in gun stands, so we weren't even putting any pressure on these deer, and they had no idea we were there. I mean, we took the 4-wheeler right to the stand, and it didn't even bother them. So, I mean, we weren't going into our bow stands. If you can just kind of get on a field edge or something, or even from your truck from the side of the road, it doesn't really bother them. And in my opinion,
it's a little different in the summer than it would be in the season. You can kind of get away with some more of that. They're still in their summer patterns, and they're not quite in the mind frame of avoiding hunters at that point.
I mean, even when we were driving around this summer looking for just scouting basically around my property, there was so many bean fields where we just stopped for like 5-10 minutes and we're just glassing because there's tons of deer and a lot of good bucks out there, and they didn't have a care in the world.
Oh, and we saw some giants in that video too. We really saw some good deer. So that can be one of the best times of year. That's probably my favorite time of year because the anticipation of the season is so high, and you just get to see all those deer. So moving into like October lull maybe is going on. Sometimes that's a myth, sometimes it's not. Does that kind of change then? Do you get a little bit more aggressive at that point? Do you hold off?
I would say we're still a little bit more conservative on that side at least. Kind of just trying to get a doe or maybe a lucky buck here and there, but we're still pretty conservative. I mean, once we know that it's like rut or getting close to the rut, then we'll get a little more aggressive. But we don't even hunt mornings really until the rut starts. Yeah. So I know you guys hunt mornings throughout the year, and so you have more knowledge on that than I do, and we're only evening hunters till about late October, early November.
Yeah, I mean, I like early season better than October, I think. So if it was up to me and it was a situation where I had bucks that I was going to be trying to go after, I think I would be more aggressive with them early season than I would into October, like getting closer to the rut before that happens. once you're into the pre-rut, even it can be really great hanging over a licking branch or just a scrape line. Colby and Eli had big time success with that this past year, and during that kind of pre-rut phase, that can even almost be a little bit better than the rut. So October is not a total wash. A lot of it depends on weather. We usually have some bad Octobers from time to
Recently,
time.
I really just love the late season to, well, more so the rut, to be able to push down there, because
Yeah,
I like pushing the boundaries. My dad and uncle are a little more on the older school side, which is nothing wrong with that, and I think I've kind of brought awareness to them of like, hey, let's try and get in there, and
yeah,
let's go see what we can do, and it's worked, and it's paid off recently, and we've been seeing a lot more deer and had a lot more close encounters. But I love pushing way down to where they're bedding and getting as close to them as possible, which is risk and reward. But I almost killed one this November doing that thing, and I mean, if you can get to where they're going and get as close as possible, you have a way better chance without, I mean, obviously without spooking them, being smart with the wind. But
right.
I live for November.
Yeah, I think in October, as far as where you're gonna sit, it probably has to transition a little bit more away from ag and maybe more onto some of the mast crop. So if you've got acorns, um, apple trees, if you've got them, or if the neighbors got them, wherever if you can get between wherever the deer are and where they're going to those trees on the neighbors too, that can be all right. But I've always thought October, they kind of, it's not that there's necessarily a lot. I mean, obviously the deer are still living somewhere. They're just not maybe as visible, and I think that's partially why, because they can bed 30 yards off of a big acorn tree where there's just going to be, acorns for days and days, and then they just don't have to really move as far.
And the weather's not like horrible in October in Wisconsin, so they have the
Yeah,
luxury.
usually.
They don't have to move to, I mean, basically stay warm or anything like that. Like, it's plenty warm where they can eat. If they can eat, sleep, and get water all within a 50-yard radius, they're not gonna move.
Yeah. So I feel like sometimes that lull is if you sat over that bean field in early September through September, and then into October you're still sitting over that bean field, it's probably going to feel like there's a lot less deer, but it's not necessarily that. I think they're just transitioning more into that, the shady oak groves. And
Well, the deer usually aren't gonna touch those beans when they're yellow.
right.
They're gonna eat them when they're green and brown.
Yeah.
In that yellow phase, they won't
Yeah.
touch them, which is, I mean, they will, but like they're gonna more hit those acorns and stuff, and that's usually like our October time when they're yellow. So that also plays a factor in trying to not sit on those field edges, because more than likely they're gonna be in the woods.
Right. And depending upon where you are and what the season is like, they might already be picking some of the fields by October. Already going to be starting to take some of that off, and so they're definitely going to transition away from it at that point. Obviously, you could have combine spillage or whatever that could potentially attract some deer, but for the most part, I usually see them kind of transition more to the mast crop. They're going after the acorns and even just browsing on shrubs and twigs and stuff, because I've watched them do that too. It'll be the middle of October and they'll just be walking along feeding on leaves and whatever else. I mean, they pretty much eat everything. So I've seen that happen quite a bit into October, where they just aren't maybe enjoying the fruitful bean fields and corn fields as much. They're kind of on to other things, and so that can change up where you want to sit a little bit. I feel like time of day wise, it still kind of ends up being a similar pattern. I know you don't really hunt much in the mornings, like until the rut, basically. We usually do more out of a necessity, because our land is so far away, we can't really afford to go over there for a weekend and then not hunt in the mornings. We kind of have to take every opportunity that we have. So it's definitely a little bit different hunting in the mornings because you can't see when you're going in there, so you have to more know where the deer are going to be so that you don't spook them. Because that's the last thing you want to do is walk in there and bump deer away, especially on a morning hunt. That's probably not going to have as high a chance at producing for you. So you'd rather make sure you don't really bump any deer in the morning so that afternoon's going to be a little bit better, because we've seen that plenty too, where you bump them out in the morning and then the rest of the weekend can be pretty much shot. So you kind of have to be careful about that. I mean, in the mornings, they're going to be making their way back to bedding. They're going to be pretty active right at first light, and then they're just going to be trying to get their way back to bedding. So you almost have to figure out how you can sneak in closer to their bedding while avoiding whatever their overnight food source is going to be. So early season, that's going to be a lot of those big fields. So if you can get to a stand that's going to be on their way back from those fields back to their bedding, and if you can get there while avoiding some of those big fields that you know they're going to be out in, that can be pretty money. Otherwise, you kind of that's kind of your option there. I mean, water holes can be decent. They can hit that on the way back to bedding, but that's what they're going to want to do. It gets hot in the early season. They're going to want to be in the shade, out just in cover where they don't have to be out in the sun.
Yeah, not moving.
Right.
Not
Just,
trying to, not being thirsty or anything like that. Just staying cool and out of the sun, like you said. And
right. Conserving some energy and just kind of hanging out. When you get into October, it's more, it can be more of a challenge like that too, because you might not be able to count on them all being out in the fields and coming back to bedding. They might be kind of lingering around some of those edges now because they're going to be feeding on acorns or whatever. So you can't necessarily just count on walking through the woods and avoiding those big food sources and trying to get there in the morning. So October mornings can be difficult too. I'd say for the most part it still kind of holds true, but it can be really important to do your scouting work in the afternoon so that you know where they're going to be in the morning. So,
yeah, I agree on that.
like that can play a huge role, is just looking into your afternoon sits and figuring out, okay, this is where they're coming from, so I know this is kind of their bedding area, and then this is where they're going to, and I can kind of expect them to be in this area over this food source in the morning when I'm going to come back to it. Because that's the biggest thing is you just want to avoid bumping them in the morning and get into where you're going to be able to basically usher them back to their beds for the day. That's kind of the morning strategy.
And then I know you guys have more like blind stands than we do.
Yeah.
Do you prefer that more than a tree stand? Or certain occasions, I should say.
Right. I think it certainly depends. The cover is certainly better the more walls that you put up, but it can also take away a lot of visibility, a lot of mobility. It's harder to move around in there. It can kind of save you a little bit. I mean, we see it with gun season, right? You hunt out of one of those because it gives you a lot more forgiveness, but you also have a gun that gives you a lot of forgiveness because now you don't have to shoot a deer that's 20 yards away. It can be 200 plus yards away and you can still shoot it. But if you're hunting out of any sort of a blind, whether it's a ground blind or more of like a gun stand up in a tree or elevated in any way, and you're still hunting with a bow, you still got to be able to get pretty close to them, which can make it a bit of a challenge still. I find the biggest issue with that is being able to shoot at a downwards angle, because when you get up in one of those stands, it looks like you have a lot of room, but then when you range like where 20 or 30 yards would be, you've got to shoot pretty low. You're not going to be able to do it sitting down. So you're going to have to stand up. And then when you stand up, you're going to have to make sure that you can both be standing up, have your bow up, and when you shoot, not have the arms of your bow, the limbs slam against the window or something. You can't just like hold it tight up there and then release your arrow and they're going to just slam against the wall. You can't have that. So now you got to stand back from there a little ways. As far as bow hunting, I mean, if you had a crossbow, I think that's a different story. As far as compound bows go, I don't really like them as much. I think it's more reserved for early season if you're looking to have one of those just general like lookout observation sits where you're not necessarily trying to kill one, you're just trying to gain some information. Bad weather, those aren't bad if it's either not go out in the woods at all because it's rainy or snowy or windy or whatever, or go sit in a spot where you're probably not going to kill a deer, but at least you get out in the woods and give it a shot and get to enjoy that time. I think then that's obviously the answer there. I think the only other time where I would really pick a stand like that would be if we had one patterned. Because if you had one patterned and that's where your stand is, we hunt primarily with ladder stands. So it's not really an easy feat to just say, okay, we've got one pattern in this spot. We don't have another stand there. Let's tear down a ladder stand and put it back up in this spot. That's probably not going to work very good.
Noisy.
Right.
I agree on those like gun stands, so to say, for us at least. The only time I'll ever sit in those with the for bow season is when it's raining or snowy. And we did that this year with my dad and I, and we could have shot 2 bucks, 2 littler bucks that came by, but I tried standing up and like drawing back on some turkeys and stuff that I was going to try and shoot, but it's hard. It's hard. And that stands 4x8. I could shoot the long way, but like looking out in front of us, I would have had to angle pretty good to not hit everything, whether it was my elbow or, like you said, the front of my bow. And so they're difficult. I mean, obviously you get a redneck or something like that, which is made for that because it's the octagon shape. Yeah. That's a little different.
It can be nice. I think, too, with a stand like that, you probably would rather be over a food plot.
Which is, I think, what most of those are.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a food plot, especially like a smaller one where you could maybe shoot to the whole thing, would be a better situation than sitting over an ag field. I mean, a lot of gun stands in Wisconsin are over ag fields. So if you're sitting there, it's going to make it real tough to get a shot. If you do have like a redneck that's an octagon, so you got a little bit more space and you're sitting over a food plot that has, that's small enough that you can shoot over all of it or most of it, I think that could be a different story. But I feel like when you sit in a stand like that, you sort of let your guard down a little bit and kind of stop hunting, where, maybe you're on your phone more than you would be if you were just out in the open, or you're making more noise than you would be if you were out in the open, or you're not worrying as much about which way the wind is blowing and controlling your scent. You get a little bit more carried away with wrappers and bottles and stuff like that. I feel like sometimes you sit in a stand like that and then subconsciously you kind of go, okay, well, I have all these walls, so they can't see me as much, they can't hear me or smell me, so I can kind of get away with more. And I feel like I just don't trust that. I don't think it's a good way to hunt.
I think the rednecks are a lot more forgiving because those are more like proven to be scent controlled. Yeah. More so than like say one that we built or something like that. That's different because we pretty much have to keep those windows open the whole time because you're not sliding those open very easily without spooking a deer. Whereas those rednecks, those are super easy, just
Yeah.
really quiet and stuff like that. So I agree. I still think, obviously, if I have the choice, I'm gonna sit in a bow stand or like a tree because that's just who I am. I like being able to see. I hate not being able to see long distances and just see in general. So
Right. So another thing is you like to be pretty high up.
I wish we were higher than what we were.
Yeah.
So like probably 2 or 3 years ago, we switched to ladder stands compared to hang-ons. My dad and uncle are getting older. Hang-ons aren't obviously as safe. I mean, you can get those lifelines. We just didn't invest in those before. We invested in ladder stands before that, and we had wood ladders, and they were like, the steps were busting out as you were climbing up them, and it just wasn't a good situation. But those were upwards of like 18, 19, sometimes 20 feet up in the air, and I love that. I really enjoyed. I like getting up as high as possible, and no one knows that. That one stand I shot my buck Blade Runner out of, that one's in a pine tree that you have to climb up our old ladder, and then climb up a couple more branches in the tree to get to the stand, and that one's probably 20, 23 feet, something like that.
That's a sketchy stand.
Yeah, once you get in there, you're good because you throw a harness on, but you got to basically climb around the tree on branches and stuff, but it's a sweet stand because you're way up there and you're hidden, so.
Right. Yeah, I mean, definitely the higher you can be, the more forgiveness is going to be there, the more cover you're going to have where you shouldn't have to worry about the visuals as much, I guess.
Our ladder stands now are at about, I think they're about 15 to the platform, right around there.
Yeah.
I wish there was another section of like another 3-foot ladder section. That'd be perfect. 18 feet's a pretty good height, if you ask me. I think that's a reasonable height, not too high, not too short type thing. Don't get me wrong, we've had a lot of success out of these 15-foot stands. I've probably shot 4 or 5 deer out of them already, so it's not like they don't work or anything like that. I just like to be higher. I feel like you could have a better advantage to see, and your shot opportunity might be a little greater, but that's just me, who I think I would test the limits maybe a little more and shoot farther than my uncles and dads would. So
when you're in one of those higher stands, do you have to do more branch trimming? Do you end up with more branches in the way or less, being that extra little bit up?
I'd probably say more, just because you're higher up, so all those branches that are lower than you, you're going to have to trim that you maybe wouldn't have trim if you're 15 feet because you're shooting more like this at 15, but at 20, 23, you're more shooting down, so you got to trim quite a bit more. But you just got to be smart about it and not trim like 6 lanes for each direction you can shoot. You're just going to have to pick a couple of them.
How many lanes do you usually cut? Because this year we started to buy more ladder stands. We put them in better areas, more focused on different wind directions and where we know deer are usually coming from or going to. And so we had some where it was like you could only shoot in front of you. That was it. You weren't going to get a shot behind you or to the sides. You just had that one spot where you could shoot, and that just provided all kinds of extra added cover that they weren't going to be able to see you as easily from these other areas.
I think that's a great idea, as long as if you know deer are going to come into that spot, like every time you sit there, if you're going to see a deer, they're going to come there. I think that's a great idea. Keeps you hidden. You don't got to worry about trying to shoot different ways if you can't even shoot that way. So then what's the big deal? You just got to focus on shooting in front of you, and then you know exactly what your yardages are and that you're not going to hit anything. Right. If you got a giant area in front of you that's wide open, you don't have to worry about anything. I mean, you get into some of our stands that are in the middle of the woods, you got trees everywhere, you got branches or little twigs that are coming off of trees that you might not even see. And I mean, you've seen it before, at least I have, in tons of like hunting videos online. You see people smoke a branch they didn't even know was there, the arrow deflects, deer just runs off like nothing happened. So
yeah, it's definitely a balance that's kind of tough to strike, because sometimes you get going and you're like, well, that branch could get in the way. It probably won't, but it could. Let's take it down. that one take down, and then before you know it, you have no cover left because everything's just gone.
Yeah,
You just cleared out the woods.
I'm really bad at that because I get a really itchy trigger finger on the chainsaw.
Yeah,
I just love cutting stuff down, so
right.
I kind of got to back off on that and more so just think, okay, would I rather have no cover and 360 degrees to shoot or tons of cover with 120 degrees to shoot?
Yeah, because I'm usually more on the side of having that cover and making sure that you put a stand kind of in that spot where you can't really let deer get behind you, because you need to have a spot where you're going to try and blow your wind towards anyways, so if you're going to try and blow your wind a certain direction, you usually want that to be because you don't expect deer to be coming from that direction. So I think you got to try to limit the shooting lanes a little bit. You kind of have to limit it down a little bit, and it depends on what you're sitting over too. If you're sitting over a food plot, you're going to be, except if you have a tree that's in the middle of it and you put a stand up in there like you've got, it's kind of on the edge but kind of up in the middle, so like for you it doesn't work as much. But if you're going to be sitting over a food plot in a ladder stand, you're probably going to be on the edge of the food plot.
Yeah, we got 2 of those that are right on the edge,
which makes it a little bit easier.
Almost more so, almost set like kind of back off the food plot a little bit,
which I like, because you don't want to just be right out in the open on a food plot like that. You got to have a little bit of that cover. So tucking yourself back a little bit can be another good way to do it.
And our stands that are on our food plots are up in pine trees, which I really like putting them in pines because those things, obviously, they hold their needles all year long. Unlike a normal tree, which is going to lose their leaves in the rut, you're just bare, wide open.
Yeah.
So I think those pine trees that give a really, really good cover, especially from like the back, because we put them, we're pretty much sitting like with the tree behind us. Not like if the tree's like this and you put your stand off to the side of it, where the deer are going to be able to see movement or a shadow, where we're right in front of it and the base of the tree's right behind us. So it's worked out well. We've killed quite a few deer like that.
Yeah, because even if you don't have any branches or any cover in front of you, you want to make sure you have it behind you so that they can't like see your silhouette and see that you're there, which using the trunk of a tree is pretty good. But then having some branches too, so that it's a backdrop and not just you like up against the sky where they can just look up and see you. Obviously, that's not going to work.
Well, and that's another thing with ladder stands. Like with hang-ons, we could be able to put a tree up. We could put the ladder on the back side of a tree and hang the stand on the front side of the tree, because you could easily just like get up the ladder and step around that. With ladder stands, you can't do that. If you can't get your ladder up the front, you got to figure out a different tree to put it in, which is kind of been a little learning curve for us, because in trees we used to have stands, we couldn't put that in there anymore because we have the ladders on the backside. So each season,
how early season, October, the rut, late season, what's kind of your rule of thumb for when you want to get into the stand?
Well, early season we like to get in, probably closes at like 7:30 opening weekend, something like that, right around there, like 4 at the latest. At least 3.5 hours, because that's that time where those deer still feel comfortable and they're not spooked by anything. They're gonna come out and feed at 5:30 for 2 hours before shooting light. So if we can get in there, if you can be patient enough and survive the bugs and heat, I'd say get in there at 3:30, 4 o'clock, because there's a good chance you're going to see quite a few deer all night long, continuous. Towards, like, honestly, for me, later in the year, I still get in with like 3 hours, 2.5 hours, but I really rarely ever see deer until like the last hour or 30 minutes.
Yeah.
It's just kind of how it is. Unless it's the rut, then that's a different story. But you got even like the early October into middle and late October, they're not really coming out until right at dark.
No.
At least the mature bucks. I mean, yeah, you'll have your does and fawns, but even them, they're not going to come out until 45 minutes before shooting light. It's just kind of how it is.
But you got to be in early enough to make sure that you're not spooking them out of there. And
so I think that 3 hour to 2.5 hour range is 2.5 at the minimum, but like 3 to 3.5 is always good, especially if you got a nice day out and go enjoy the the woods and stuff like that, so you don't have to. Or if it's raining, then I might push it back a little bit just because
Right.
you don't want to get soaked and sit out there and
Yeah.
get everything wet for no reason.
Yeah, that's always the question of the day whenever we're hunting a morning. When do you want to get out? Obviously, you got to get in there hopefully before dark. Now, usually during the rut, you do that a little bit differently, but for the majority of the season, we're trying to get in there and pretty much be set up while it's still dark out. So before the sun's even up enough to be able to see, let alone to be able to shoot, we usually want to be in there and set up. And then it's about how late do you want to sit. And when it's during the rut, that's going to be more like an all day type of sit. But during some of those other seasons, just like how they can only come out like an hour before dark, they might only be out an hour after dark in the mornings and then kind of be going away. So, I mean, obviously, one of the things that can help you, whether it's morning or afternoon, throughout the year is trail camera pictures and being able to see, what are the patterns of these deer around here? Are they what time are they generally coming out? Because we can usually do that. We can usually look at our trail cameras and say, okay, by 8:30 in the morning, we're usually done getting pictures until like 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So by 9 o'clock, it's pretty safe to say that all the deer are going to be back to their beds, not necessarily huntable. So it's kind of safe at that point to get out of there, have some lunch, watch football if football's on, and kind of get ready then for the afternoon sit.
And I think there's something to say about, like you said, what time do you want to get in there? So early season this last year, we had a buck kind of almost patterned coming into one of our watering holes. And he's coming in right at dark, 20 minutes at the earliest before dark. It's like, oh, you don't want to get, you got to get in there 3.5 hours earlier because we got does coming in at 3 o'clock, and they're there all day long. They're living close, so you kind of want to get in there earlier, even though you're hunting. The deer you're hunting isn't going to come in till 20 minutes before shooting light's over, but those does are going to be in there, and you don't want to bust them out, because if you bust them out and they're not in there, that buck might be like, well, what's going on? I mean, these other deer are usually always here, and they're not, so there's something to be said about that too.
Then he's going to be on alert when he comes out, and that'll never be good. And yeah, then you really got to buckle down and not bump those deer while you're sitting there too, because you obviously don't want to walk in on them, but when you're there early and then they come in on you, you also don't want to be bumping them at that point.
And that particular stand I'm talking about, where we have that water hole, is 10 yards off the field edge. I mean, that one, if you bump deer going in there, that's because they're laying 10 yards from your stand.
Yeah.
So I really like that stand too. I used to hate it. I used to never see deer there. I still usually don't see deer in the morning there if it's like a morning rut hunt, but the afternoons are killer there, because they come onto this field, and that's almost where I got a shot at that buck.
Yeah.
And I could have, but it just wasn't the right timing, and a couple things weren't going right in the situation, and they come out and feed in that field, and their beddings, they bed 50 yards to the south of me down a little ravine, and there's a water hole, and they just feel really comfortable there, not a lot of pressure, so it's a really good stand.
Yeah. So walk me through when the rut is finally here. What does one of those days look like, as far as what kind of stand are you going to be picking, when are you going to be getting there, how long are you sitting, all that good stuff?
So the rut's a little different for my family, at least, and that's kind of how I was raised, and we don't get in there until like it's pretty much breaking daylight, close to shooting hours. Like, we're walking in when the sun's coming up and you could legally shoot a deer, basically. We do that for a couple of reasons, just because the main reason being we've had multiple encounters where we're walking in, and if you get that right buck or that right time of year, they're going to follow you because they think you're another buck. And we've had it where my dad and I, actually a couple of years ago, we got set up. We were sitting together because I was filming them, and we're climbing up the ladder, and we're like just getting set up, and we hear, here comes a little buck following us because he could hear us. It was a pretty quiet morning, and he thought it was another deer. So that kind of gives you a slim chance of, obviously, if you had one coming in, you could shoot it. But I mean that's more rare. But
This year I was almost molested twice. I mean, because they just came right up on me. The one time we just got out of the truck, and the deer came like right from the truck, and he was following me, and he was just getting right up on me, and I let him get to like 10 yards before I finally freaked out at him and told him to go away. But I mean, he was just like, finally, I could just see his eyes. Even when I would shine my light at him, I couldn't see even how big he was. It was still too dark at that point. I could just see his beady little eyes, and he's getting closer and closer to me, and I'm freaking out because I know he's a buck and he's got antlers and they're sharp. I don't want to get charged or anything. And then there's another time we're walking in, and I was with my brother at this time, and we just walked up on one. He must have been bedded down. We were just walking down the driveway, and we almost stepped on him. We got to like 5 yards. Next thing I know, he's jumping out of the brush. He took a couple steps at us, and then finally went and took off the other direction. And he's just going full head of steam because we just got so close to him.
And they get in that mood during the rut that and nothing really matters. They're crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, they don't care about anything. They're gonna.
And it's like, you guys are supposed to be afraid of me right now. What are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
So I definitely that was never something that we really worried about during the rut, as far as like getting in there in daylight still. But now that makes a lot of sense.
And there's another, like, you could say you're going into a stand or like an area where you know you're gonna be able to see deer like from the ground. You're walking in there right at daylight and you see a bunch of deer, or maybe there's a buck chasing a doe in there. You could just sit down on the ground and wait, or back out and come to a different stand or get around them a different way and without bumping them, because you got in there at that time where you can see the deer, and instead of getting in there like in dark bumping those deer out and you don't even know what they were before you got in there, then your day's shot. So that's just a couple of reasons, and obviously I'm not saying that's the right way to do it at all. That's just how we've done it.
Yeah.
It's probably screwed us over maybe a couple times, but it's worked in our favor quite a bit.
And then during the rut, you're going to be sitting all day.
A lot of at least 4-hour morning sits usually.
Yeah.
3 to 4 hours, and if it's a hot, crazy day and you're seeing deer, pack a lot of snacks, because there's sometimes you're going to sit, like there's a couple stands that we have that if you're going to get in there, you might as well just sit all day, because you're probably going to see a lot of deer and there's no point in getting out and coming back in because you're just going to bump deer. So
yeah. We had one year during the rut where we decided not to sit all day. We got out after a long morning, went back, got a little bit of lunch. I think we went to one of the local shops that had deer rifles, and so we were looking at different deer rifles that were just kind of passing the time before we were going to get back in there in the afternoon. We were going to get in there pretty early in the afternoon, and I want to say we were planning on getting back there about 12:30, 1 o'clock, maybe. Let's say 1 o'clock, and half hour before we were going to get back there, target buck walks past the camera right where my dad would have been sitting. He could have easily shot him. So it during the rut, you just never know.
There's no rhyme or reason to it. Those deer are just in a different mind state.
You can't
mindset.
Yeah, you can't really pattern them. They're just kind of doing whatever they're doing.
And so either you get in early, you bump them, you get in late and you see them. There's no rhyme or reason.
No.
You just got to get in there and try and hunt them.
Yeah, I think if you can during the rut, you got to sit as long as you can. Pull an all-day sit if
they
it's
can
possible.
be long and boring and little action, but if you see the right deer, it can get real exciting real quick.
I think the boredom is the easiest to overcome. It's more like this year we had just terrible weather. So if it's raining or it's snowing or it's just super cold,
hurricane winds, I mean,
yeah,
I've never been that scared in my life.
There was one day we legitimately had hurricane force winds.
Like 60 miles an hour came through, and I had to hang on to my bow. Like my dad got down, and I ended up getting down eventually, but I went back up there, which was pretty stupid on my part. Not looking back at it, because if that tree would have went, that would have been toast.
Yeah.
I mean, it was like there was trees in front of me that were basically like bent completely over. I mean, it was horrible.
I mean, I don't mind a nice sunny Saturday afternoon when the trees are swaying just a little bit and you can just kind of bob around with them, maybe nap for 15 minutes or maybe an hour, depends how it feels, but yeah, that's something else. You can't have that where the
It's not
trees
worth
are
it.
bending over. No. Yeah, there was one storm that came through up north. This wasn't this year. It would have been 2 years ago, 3 years ago, that like leveled a bunch of trees. You remember that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not something to mess around with.
It's not worth it for a deer.
No.
And looking back at it, I was probably just a little too. I just that's what a spot stand I missed. I didn't shoot at that buck, but I had him come in, so I was just bound and determined to stick down there and try and get another crack at him. It just wasn't worth it.
And it's not the greatest conditions for them to be moving around anyways.
What
but
deer is gonna get up and walk around when it's 60 mile an hour winds and they can barely even stand? I mean,
Right.
I climbed down and brought my boat on with me, and it was. I'm thinking in my head like, this is horrible. Like I'm texting my dad and uncle, and we're all texting each other like, "You guys all right? Did you guys get down?" And
Yeah.
eventually, my dad and uncle both ended up moving to gun stands, which are a lot sturdier, obviously. But I was stupid and stuck it out, and ended up seeing like 3 deer. Not the one I wanted to, but
Yeah. So when you're fortunate enough to have a good chunk of land to be able to hunt on, and you have a bunch of stands, you can't sit at all of them every time. So how do you go about picking which stand you're gonna sit at any given day?
well, so there's 3 of us that bow hunt the property that I hunt. So we have minimum of 3 stands for each wind. And obviously, like if it's a southwest or straight west, you can kind of get away with that, or northwest and west are kind of set up for the same thing. The wind direction is huge for us. And like we said, there's few and far stands we're gonna hunt in the middle of the woods with, even with the perfect wind, it almost has to be perfect condition. And those stands are like for east winds, which is something we rarely get, but it's kind of like the reward factor of waiting and not going down there. You see good bucks and or deer you want to shoot, and lots of deer. So, but mostly wind. Wind and I guess it's the crop almost. What if you're sitting on a field edge like for corn? You're not going to sit there because you're only going to have a 5-yard window to shoot when they're coming from the corn, the path to the woods. So that's different. But do you mean like how we pick stands, or who gets to pick where, or more so how we just determine?
Yeah, I mean, just which one do you go to? Like, let's say
Obviously, cameras play a huge role in this
cameras
too.
play a huge role. Let's say it's late October. You've got your target buck patterned at a stand. He's coming in there. You know he's going to be there every day. You know what time. The only thing you don't know is how long is that pattern going to keep up. He could do it for another week, or he could have done it for the last time yesterday. So you're getting ready. You want to go sit that stand, but the wind sucks. You going to sit there?
Late October,
Yeah.
I'd probably push it a little bit and try to. If it's the second weekend, I'm not gonna. And the only reason I say late October I would is because it's the rut, and also because time's running out for us. All of our neighbors hunt. All of them are older, retired people who can hunt every day if they wanted to, and a lot of them do. So we get those couple days where we might push the envelope a little bit. Early season, we're not gonna, and it may have cost us a few deer, but it's this, you always got to bet on the deer.
Yeah.
Bet on the deer to, even if you were there and they come in and smell you, then you blow them out forever, so you don't even have that chance. If you bet on him, yeah, you might make that mistake, which they have, and went over and crossed the property line, and the neighbors have killed them. But it's something you can do. You can't kill them if you blow them out or scare them before you even get a chance to hunt them. So,
and that's the point. Is if it's when it comes to deciding where am I going to sit today, if you have a bunch of options, the last thing you want to do is bump deer by picking the wrong stand. And you can even you could bump deer from them smelling you hundreds of yards away. You might not even know that they ever showed up that day.
Mm-hmm.
So you could think you didn't bump any deer, but you never even saw them because they smelled you that far away that they never even came in that far.
I think we talked about this one podcast. I think it might have been with my dad that if we know there's going to be deer in this one, like say you want to go see a bunch of deer but the wind's not right, you got to not suck it up, but be smart about it and go sit a different stand
Right.
because you're not going to ruin anything from going to there, and you still have a great opportunity to see deer. You're just not going to see maybe the deer you're expecting to, but if you go sit on the stand where you want to see those deer, you're going to blow it up and nothing good's going to come from that.
So certain stands do you save then early season? You're like, oh, that's going to be a great stand. I could probably kill a deer there tonight, but I'm going to save it.
Mm-hmm. Quite a few. A lot of our food plots, try not to shoot or sit early season unless we have them patterned, just because the deer feel comfortable in there. They come there, they know this is food for them. They come here every night to eat and stuff like that. So yeah, there's quite a few stands actually that we don't hunt a lot until later in the year.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think for us we have less stands. Still some more options than we've had in the past, but it's a little bit more difficult to save some of them. But there was our one stand that probably was our best stand. We never even got to sit in this year because the wind was so bad. And then I guess you can go back and forth and say, well, then nobody shot a deer. You never got to sit there. Does it even matter then? Should somebody have just sat there even on a day when the wind wasn't great? Because the end result is still going to be the same. What did it matter anyways? But I think I'm happier with just doing the right thing and staying away from that spot if it's not going to be the right wind, because you don't know how it's going to play out. And I think avoiding a really good spot because sitting there could jeopardize seeing any deer in the future. I think that's not a bad move at all.
It sucks at first, but in the long run, it's the right thing to do.
Right. It's hard to sit in a stand where you're like, I don't know if I'm going to see any deer here, and not sit in a stand that you're thinking I could probably kill a deer here today. It's hard to make that choice.
But you just don't want to educate them.
Right.
Because
it's the worst thing you can do.
They're smart, and they remember that. They remember it. They're going to come in there, they're going to look up and be like, yep. Or they might not even come in anymore. They could stand 100 yards away and see you up in that stand, and they go, yeah, but we're not coming in today type thing, and there goes your hunt.
Yeah, I think it's the worst thing you can do to try and educate deer in any way. I think the more you can keep them in the dark, the better your odds are going to be at any time throughout the season.
And like you said, that do we save stands for later in the year? Well, if we're basing it off the wind, it kind of just falls that way. We get a lot of prominent south winds in early season, so a lot of our south wind stands are kind of like our early season stands type thing, and the northwest are later in the year. I mean, you get those in the early season, but they're more so later in the year. And
right.
A couple of those stands are down in swamps where there's so many leaves and it's just so tall, thick green grass, you can't even see deer.
Yeah.
You got to wait for everything to lay down and some leaves to start dropping before you can even see deer in there. So it's just how they are with all of our stands. And I think we got them strategically set up pretty well. I mean, my dad and uncles have been hunting it for like 30 years.
Yeah.
So they've known it a lot better than I do. I've got to learn it a lot more, and I've pushed the envelope quite a bit more, and I'm glad they let me. And I've already got more ideas for this coming up season, which they're probably not going to be too thrilled about at first, but I think it'll pay off in the future. Might involve taking the raft down the river and getting in one way, but if you want to, that would be more of an all-day rut sit. Just
Right. Or just the right situation with the right wind and maybe the right deer in a certain pattern. I could see that working, but definitely exploring different areas on the property. You can you can limit yourself pretty hard, even on the biggest properties, by just not going into certain areas. So the more you can kind of explore and the more options that you give yourself, even if it is a situation where your your property borders up to a creek that is plenty navigable with the right kayak or canoe or a raft or something like that. So if there's a stand that you could only get in by using that access, I mean, why not?
Mm-hmm.
It just opens up the property that much more because now that's acreage that you can hunt that probably is pretty good that you couldn't get to otherwise.
Yep, it's all but trial and error. You don't know unless you try, and if you fail, well, then you know not to go there again. And if
Yeah.
it succeeds, though, and you got a pretty good spot. But that that's kind of what I've taken away recently. You're gonna fail a lot, but you're gonna learn a lot too.
So when's the right time to take stands down then?
Well, we just do it when it's convenient. It's convenient for us to do it on the last Saturday of gun season in Wisconsin, just because we got a lot of hands up there, a lot of help. Not a lot of people are gonna hunt late season. I mean, I try to, but I have my couple of my permanent stands that are up always, so we can hunt those. And if you're a big late season guy, I'd leave them up no later than the last couple of days of there, because you start to get into January, snow, rust, everything's frozen, super hard to take down. When we do it in November, it's pretty still decent out. You can get them down pretty easily, and you can still drive through the fields to get to them. You're not trying to trug through snow and stuff like that. So
Yeah, because we made that mistake this year. We just never got them down. I think we thought that we were going to go back and maybe hunt it another time and then never did. And then stuff just came up and we never made it back there to go take them all down. So that we're going to find out what happens when you leave them up there all winter. I'm sure doing it just 1 year probably isn't the worst thing ever.
they'll be all right. But I mean, if you did it consistently and if you left your stands up for 4 years straight without even taking them down, those ratchets aren't safe. You're gonna start breaking those, and
Yeah.
it's just not a good deal.
Yeah, I agree. Well, to wrap it up, um, while we're talking about stands here, what is your favorite type of stand setup? So doesn't matter what time of year, just if you could only hunt in one setup, what would it be?
Um, Probably like hardwoods, which is something I don't have a ton of. But that's something I really enjoy doing when I do get to do that. I mean, I love seeing deer coming from a ways away, and kind of like I get not say their natural habitat, but where they live and spend most of their time, where they're bedding and stuff like that. I love like larger woods areas to hunt. I mean, don't get me wrong, the fields are always fun to hunt in swamps, but I just really love hardwoods.
Yeah, those fields can be really nice like that early season. It's hard to turn down the chance at being able to sit over a bean field and watch 40, 50, 100 deer pile out and just get to watch them for an afternoon and get the binoculars up and just be in the woods watching deer. It's kind of hard to turn that down, but I think the best stand to me is a spot in the woods, probably in some hardwoods, where a couple of hot trails converge, or you've got a couple of trails running in some different directions in the same little area there, the same little chunk of woods. Because early season, that's probably going to be a spot where they're going to be going between food and bedding, and then as the season goes on, they might be kind of checking some scrapes in there, running more of those scrape lines, getting into the pre-rut and the rut. So I think where you can have like known travel corridors that's between two areas, whether it's food and bedding or between water and a mast crop situation, or between a food plot and bedding. I mean, anything like that where there's going to be heavy traffic going through there, if you can get onto the kind of the back side of that where you can blow your scent behind it, and maybe it all kind of depends on the topography too, because you have to be able to blow your scent in a certain direction where they're hopefully not going to be traveling. You don't want to just be right in the middle of it, or you're going to spook a lot of deer that way. So you got to have the right situation, the right elevations and things like that. But if you can get to a spot where maybe it's more of a funnel, so you've got heavy traffic in this 30 or 40 yard wide chunk of woods, but you can get on the edge of it where you can blow your scent out over a cornfield where you don't expect any deer to be, and out in front of you is the whole funnel where they're all going to be moving. That can really be money, especially if you set it up right. If you put in a man-made water hole or licking branches, mock scrapes, if you plant your own apple trees. I mean, there's a lot of like land improvement things that you could do to make a spot a little bit better too. But those travel corridors like that, you can't beat them.
Yeah, I agree. I like the big woods and the in between bedding areas and traveling areas to get to food. I really enjoy those hunts.
You ever fallen out of a tree stand?
Unfortunately, yes. We weren't. I wasn't even hunting it. Taking them down. Brand new. Our first year taking these tree stands up and down. I didn't do enough research. And for a ladder stand, there is a stabilizer bar, which is like your 5th, 6th rung up, 5-6 feet off the ground probably.
Yeah.
And as I learned quickly, that is the first thing to come off when you take them down and the last thing to go on when you put them up. If you don't take it off the first thing when you're going to take them down, you get up there and you undo your first ratchet strap and you undo your second one, and it's almost like a spring, and the tree stand just flings right off the tree, and next thing you know, you're riding it down as far as you can until you jump off about a couple feet off the ground, and that's what I did. I unratcheted it, the first one, and I could feel a little tension, but I didn't think nothing of it. First one I take down, do the second one, and it like boom pops off the tree, and thankfully I could I hit another tree behind me, so I pushed off that, and then I tipped over and I rode it down, and right before I hit the ground I just flung off it, and thankfully I was decent. I mean, I was all right. I ended up having knee surgery a couple weeks later.
Well, it wasn't from that.
Well, it could have been prior to it. It was messed up to begin with, but it definitely didn't help landing like that.
That could have made it worse for sure. Yeah. Well, that's a good piece of advice, I guess. Yeah, take the stabilizer bar out first so that you don't launch yourself off of the tree.
Yeah, it was a learning curve, and I know my dad was there and he watched the whole thing, and it was kind of scary, honestly, because there's no joke falling out of tree stands. I mean, unfortunately, it claims a few lives, I think, every year.
Yeah, it's nothing to be, we can joke around about it now because you were all right, but you can't take it lightly. It's serious stuff. I mean, it can really, you're working at heights like that. Anytime you're going to fall, it doesn't take much. You land the wrong way. Even if you land the right way, you break enough bones, and depending upon where you are and who you're with.
I would say if you're going to take down stands, bring someone with no matter what.
Yeah.
You never know what's going to happen. You fall out there by yourself, no one's going to find you or hear you till they start looking for you. So,
and half of the old timers out there don't bring a phone with them.
Yeah.
You fall down, even if you just break your ankle and you can't walk around. Well, if you can't call anybody or whatever, I mean, how is anybody going to know? People are going to have to come looking for you at dark when you don't come back. So that's good advice too. Make sure you got a phone, some way to communicate with people, let people know where you're going to be going. And if you can bring an extra set of hands, it'll make it easier too, just getting stuff down.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, if you're watching this on YouTube, thank you guys for watching. Leave us a comment. It could be anything. We did a whole stand episode here, so if you've got any comments on stand setups that you like, or any other pieces of stand advice, something you want to share, leave us a comment. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel. If you're listening anywhere else, thanks for listening, and rate our podcast here if you can, if you like it. Those 5-star ratings are huge for us. So if you could do that, we'd really appreciate it. That'd be pretty big.
Mm-hmm.
All right, guys. Thank you for watching and listening. We'll see you guys next time.